In the grand hall filled with laughter on Christmas Eve, everyone fell silent as the single father named Henry Calder walked toward the old piano. He only meant to play a gentle lullaby for his daughter to sleep, but the moment the melody rose, CEO Ingrid Whitmore stood frozen. It was the very song her first love had written just for her, a secret no one else knew. Her hands trembled, her heart tearing open, because the man who wrote that song had died years ago. So why could he play it? The corporate tower's lobby had already been transformed into a winter wonderland by the time Henry arrived that evening. White lights cascaded down marble pillars like frozen waterfalls, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled every corner. Employees mingled in clusters, champagne glasses catching the glow of a massive tree near the executive elevators. Henry Calder moved through the crowd almost invisibly. His gray work shirt faded from too many washes, his calloused hands still bearing traces of grease from fixing a heating vent earlier that day. At 36, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that most people overlooked. They saw the janitor. They didn't see the artist whose fingers once danced across concert hall stages, whose name had briefly appeared in regional papers as a rising talent before everything fell apart. His daughter Audrey clung to his hand, her 7-year-old frame practically vibrating with excitement. Her dark curls bounced as she tugged him toward the dessert table, her brown eyes wide with wonder at the chocolate fountain. Henry watched her with the kind of love that made his chest ache, fierce and protective, and tinged with guilt that he couldn't give her the childhood she deserved. No expensive dresses, no private schools, just a cramped apartment where the radiator clanked at night and the piano in the community center down the street where she sometimes heard him play when he thought no one was listening. Across the hall, Ingrid Whitmore stood on the mezzanine level, surveying her domain with the practiced poise of someone born to command rooms. At 34, she had transformed her father's struggling real estate firm into Whitmore Holdings, a juggernaut of commercial development that now owned 40% of the city's waterfront. Her honey blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and the crimson dress she wore a bold V-neck that demanded attention without apology made her impossible to miss. But it was her eyes that truly arrested people. Ice blue and calculating, they seemed to measure every person, every angle, every potential weakness or opportunity. Most found her intimidating. Some called her ruthless. No one called her soft. Yet, beneath the armor of her designer wardrobe and cutting boardroom reputation, Ingrid carried a wound that had never fully healed. 16 years ago, when she was 18 and still believed in fairy tales, she had fallen in love with a boy named Leon Merritt. He was a piano prodigy, all wild, dark hair and passionate eyes, the kind of talent that made you forget to breathe when he played. He had written her a song, just for her. He called it Starlit Promise, and he played it for her one night under a sky full of stars at their summer music camp, whispering that it held everything he felt but couldn't say. 3 weeks later, Leon died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway. The song died with him. Or so Ingrid believed. She never heard it played again. She forbade herself from listening to music the way she once had, treating it instead as background noise, afraid that if she let herself feel too deeply, the grief would swallow her whole. Audrey's bright voice cut through Ingrid's thoughts. The child had somehow wandered away from her father and was now standing near the dessert table, reaching for a chocolate-covered strawberry that sat just beyond her grasp. As she stretched on tiptoes, her foot slipped on something wet, champagne, probably, spilled by a careless guest. She went down hard, her knee cracking against the marble floor. The sound was small but sharp, and immediately Audrey's face crumpled. Blood seeped through her tights. Henry was across the room in seconds, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket, he always carried one for moments like this, and pressed it gently to her scraped knee. His voice was low and soothing, the kind of voice that could calm storms. Audrey's sobs quieted to hiccups as he held her, his broad hand cradling the back of her head. But before Henry could lift her to carry her to the restroom to properly clean the wound, A man's voice sliced through the moment. Flynn Baker strode over, his tailored navy suit immaculate, his jaw tight with irritation. Flynn was Ingrid's fiancé, or rather, the man her father had chosen for her to marry in 6 weeks. He was handsome in a catalog model way, with perfectly styled chestnut hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked in private equity and spoke frequently about optimizing assets and maximizing shareholder value in a tone that made it clear he viewed most things, including people, as items on a spreadsheet. "Can you control your child?" Flynn snapped at Henry, gesturing at the small smear of blood on the floor. "This is a corporate event, not a daycare. If you can't afford a babysitter, maybe you shouldn't have brought her." Henry's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "She's 7. She slipped. It was an accident that wouldn't have happened if you knew your place." Flynn's eyes raked over Henry's work clothes with undisguised contempt. "Your maintenance, there's a staff entrance for a reason." Audrey's bottom lip trembled, and something in Henry's chest cracked. He opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in first. Ingrid Whitmore descended the mezzanine stairs with deliberate grace, each step measured and purposeful. When she reached them, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Flynn with a coldness that could frost windows. "You don't have the authority to speak to my employees that way," she said quietly. The room had gone silent, everyone watching. "Apologize." Flynn's face flushed. "Ingrid, I was just—" "Apologize," she repeated, her tone allowing no room for negotiation. "Now." Flynn's lips pressed into a thin line, but he managed a clipped "sorry," directed more at the floor than at Henry or Audrey. Ingrid turned to Henry then, and for just a moment her expression softened. She saw the way he held his daughter, the care in his touch, the protective fury barely restrained in his shoulders. She saw something that felt dangerously close to recognition, though she couldn't name why. "Take care of your daughter," Ingrid said gently. "The first aid kit is in the executive lounge. 5th floor. Take the private elevator." She gestured toward the brass doors behind her desk. Henry nodded, his throat too tight for words, and carried Audrey away. By the time they returned an hour later, Audrey's knee properly bandaged and her spirits restored by the hot chocolate and cookies a kind executive assistant had provided, the party had grown louder. Someone had opened the piano, a vintage Steinway that usually sat covered and silent in the corner, more decorative than functional. A few employees had gathered around it, laughing and requesting songs from a tipsy accountant who knew 3 chords and played them with more enthusiasm than skill. Audrey tugged Henry toward the instrument. "Daddy, can you play? Please, just one song so I can sleep?" Henry hesitated. He hadn't played publicly in years. The accident? God, the accident had shattered more than his hand. It had broken something in his soul, made him afraid to touch the keys in front of anyone who might judge, who might remember what he used to be, and see only what he'd become. But Audrey's eyes were so hopeful, and it was Christmas Eve, and she'd been so brave about her scraped knee. How could he say no? He sat down at the piano, and the crowd quieted, curiosity replacing their chatter. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. Then he began to play. The melody that filled the hall was unlike anything most of them had ever heard. It was gentle at first, like rain on glass, each note placed with such precision and care that it felt less like music and more like a conversation whispered in the dark. Then it grew, swelling into something achingly beautiful, a cascade of sound that spoke of longing and loss and a love so deep it had no words. Henry's eyes closed as he played, his damaged hand scarred from where the stage rigging had crushed it 12 years ago, moving with a grace that defied its injury. He played from memory, from the marrow of his bones, every note a piece of his heart laid bare. On the mezzanine, Ingrid Whitmore had been preparing to leave when the music reached her. She froze mid-step, her hand gripping the brass railing so hard her knuckles turned white. The melody wrapped around her like a ghost, pulling her back through 16 years to a summer night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, and a boy with dark eyes had played this exact song for her. Starlit Promise, Leon's song, Leon's gift. The last piece of him she had left, buried so deep in her memory that she'd convinced herself she might have imagined its beauty. But she hadn't imagined it. It was real. Every note, every pause, every aching phrase exactly as Leon had played it. How? How could this stranger, this janitor, know Leon's song? Ingrid's vision blurred. Her chest constricted, each breath a labor. Around her, guests murmured appreciation, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her feet had just shattered. She descended the stairs on unsteady legs, drawn to the piano as if magnetized. Henry finished the song and opened his eyes to find the CEO standing 3 feet away, her face pale, her blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. Henry stood slowly, his heart hammering. He'd known this moment might come someday, had dreaded it and longed for it in equal measure. "It's just an old melody. Something I picked up years ago. Don't lie to me." Ingrid's voice sharpened, desperation creeping into her tone. "That song, it was written for me. By someone who died 16 years ago. No one else knew it. No one could have known it." She stepped closer, searching his face for answers he wasn't ready to give. "Who are you?" Before Henry could respond, Audrey appeared at his side, sleepy and smiling. "That was beautiful, Daddy. Can we go home now?" Ingrid's gaze dropped to the child, then back to Henry. She saw the fear in his eyes, the way he instinctively moved to shield his daughter from her intensity. She forced herself to breathe, to step back, to remember where she was. But as Henry gathered Audrey's coat and hurried toward the exit, Ingrid stood rooted to the spot, the melody still echoing in her skull like a hymn or a curse. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Leon's face, heard his voice promising her forever in notes instead of words. But now another image kept intruding. The janitor's scarred hands moving across the keys, the sorrow etched into the lines around his eyes, the way he'd held his daughter like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Who was he, and how had he stolen a piece of her past? The next morning, Ingrid arrived at the office 2 hours early, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. She pulled Henry Calder's employee file and spread it across her desk. The information was sparse. Hired 3 years ago as maintenance staff. No college degree listed. Previous employment at a warehouse, a grocery store. Odd jobs. Emergency contact. None listed except for Audrey Calder, age 7, daughter. No mention of a wife or partner. The file said nothing about music, nothing about talent, nothing that explained how a man working night shifts, fixing toilets and changing light bulbs could play like that. Ingrid picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "I need you to find someone for me, Corbin Hale. He's a composer, used to teach at the Berkshire Music Academy. Track him down. I need to speak with him today." Corbin Hale arrived at her office that evening, a lean man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes obscured by wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been Leon's mentor, the one who'd recognized the boy's genius and nurtured it until the accident stole him away. Ingrid hadn't spoken to Corbin in over a decade, but when she called, he came without question. She played him a recording she'd found online. Someone had filmed Henry playing last night on their phone and posted it to a private group. Corbin listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When the video ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "Is it Starlit Promise? Leon's song?" Corbin hesitated. "It's the same melody, yes, but Ingrid, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 16 years ago, but I didn't because I thought it would hurt you more than help." Ingrid's pulse quickened. "What?" Leon didn't finish that song. He wrote the opening, the first 8 bars, and he was brilliant, he always was. But he got stuck. He couldn't figure out where to take it. He was frustrated, kept scrapping versions, starting over. Corbin paused, choosing his words carefully. There was another student at camp that summer. Quiet kid, talented, but overlooked. Leon asked him for help. The other student took Leon's opening and completed it, turned those 8 bars into something extraordinary. But then Leon died, and the song became his legacy. I never corrected the record because I thought it would dishonor his memory. Ingrid felt the room tilt. Who was the other student? I don't remember his name. It's been so long. He didn't fight for credit. When Leon died, he just disappeared. Ingrid's hands clenched into fists on her desk. Henry Calder. The man who played last night. Could it have been him? Corbin looked at the frozen frame of the video on her laptop screen, at Henry's face illuminated by the piano's reading light. I don't know. Maybe. But there's only one way to find out. Ask him. But asking Henry proved more difficult than Ingrid anticipated. He didn't show up for his next shift, or the one after that. When she finally sent security to his listed address, a run-down apartment building on the east side, they found it empty. The landlord said Henry and his daughter had left 3 days ago, paid up their rent through the end of the month, and disappeared without a forwarding address. Ingrid felt panic claw at her chest. She'd driven him away. Her questions, her intensity, her desperate need for answers had frightened him off. But why? What was he hiding? Or more accurately, what was he protecting? The answer came on a night when snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing the city in white silence. Ingrid had been working late, trying to distract herself from the gnawing emptiness that Leon's song, Henry's song, had reopened inside her. She was about to call her driver when she heard piano music drifting up from the lobby. Faint, haunting, unmistakable. She took the stairs, her heels clicking on marble, her breath coming too fast. The lobby was empty, except for a single figure seated at the piano. Henry. His back was to her, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He played Starlit Promise again, but this time it sounded different. Sadder. More resigned. You came back, Ingrid said. Henry's hands stilled on the keys. He didn't turn around. I shouldn't have run. Audrey asked me why we left, and I couldn't give her a good answer. She liked it here. Liked the cookies the nice lady gave her. Liked watching the lights. He paused. I owed you the truth, even if you hate me for it. I could never hate you for playing beautifully, Ingrid said, moving closer. But I need to understand. That song, Starlit Promise, Leon Merritt was supposed to have written it for me before he died. But Corbin told me Leon didn't finish it. Someone else did. She stopped directly behind him. Was it you? Henry finally turned to face her. Up close, Ingrid could see the silver threaded through his light brown hair, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much worry. But his eyes, gray-green and achingly honest, held hers without flinching. Yes, he said simply. It was me. Ingrid's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you let him take credit? Because he loved you, Henry said. And I was nobody. Just some kid who played because he had to, not because he was destined for greatness like Leon was. I was at that music camp on a scholarship I could barely afford. My family had nothing. I worked nights, washing dishes at a diner just to pay for my bus fare there and back. And then I saw you. He laughed bitterly. You probably don't remember. Why would you? I was invisible. But I watched you laugh with Leon, watched the way your eyes lit up when he played, and I thought that's what love looks like. That's what it means to matter to someone. And I wanted to give you something, even if you never knew it came from me. So you wrote a love song for another man to give to me, Ingrid whispered. I wrote a love song for you, Henry corrected. Leon just delivered it. He knew I had feelings I couldn't express. He wasn't cruel about it. He offered to tell you the truth, but I said no. I told him you were meant for someone like him, someone brilliant and confident and whole, not someone like me. Tears streaked down Ingrid's face unchecked. And then he died. And then he died, Henry echoed. And I let the song be his legacy because it made you happy, because it gave you something to hold on to. And I went home and tried to forget that I'd ever been anyone other than what I am now. What happened to you? Ingrid asked. Corbin said you were talented. Why are you fixing pipes instead of playing concert halls? Henry held up his right hand, turning it so she could see the scars that webbed across his palm and up his wrist. 3 years after that summer, I signed a contract with a performance company. Your father's company, actually. Whitmore Productions. It was supposed to be my big break. I got my hand caught trying to push a cellist out of the way. By the time they pulled me out, the bones were crushed. 3 surgeries later, the doctor said I'd never play professionally again. Ingrid's blood turned to ice. My father's company. The investigation concluded it was a cost-cutting measure gone wrong. Someone approved substandard equipment to save money. The company settled quietly with everyone involved. I got enough to cover my medical bills, barely. Then, the contract was terminated, and I was adrift. He smiled without humor. So I learned to fix the things that break. Seemed fitting. Ingrid felt sick. Her father. George Whitmore had always been ruthless in business. But this? Did you know? When you took this job here, did you know who I was? Not at first, Henry admitted. I needed work. Any work. But then I saw your name on the directory, and I wondered. And then I saw you, and I knew. He met her eyes. I stayed because I'm a coward. Because seeing you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. Before Ingrid could respond, the lobby doors burst open. Flynn Baker strode in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, 2 men in suits flanked a third figure. Ingrid recognized immediately. Her father, George Whitmore, the older man, carried himself with the same imperious bearing that had defined his 30-year reign as CEO before Ingrid took over. His silver hair was slicked back, his charcoal suit impeccable, but his eyes, cold and calculating, held nothing but contempt as they landed on Henry. So it's true, George said, his voice dripping with disdain. My daughter has been sneaking around with the help. Ingrid, I raised you better than this. What are you doing here? Ingrid demanded, stepping between her father and Henry. Flynn called me. Said you were making a fool of yourself over some janitor who's trying to extort you with a sob story about an old accident. George's lips curled. I assume he's talking about the Whitmore Productions incident? The one where that nobody pianist tried to sue us for millions because he was too clumsy to avoid falling equipment. He's not trying to extort anyone, Ingrid said sharply. And that accident wasn't his fault. It was ours. It was business. George corrected. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the bottom line. The boy was compensated fairly. Fairly? Ingrid's voice rose. You destroyed his career and paid him barely enough to cover his medical bills. You ruined his life. George waved a dismissive hand. He was mediocre at best. We did him a favor. If he'd actually had talent, he would have found a way to succeed despite the injury. His gaze slid to Henry with undisguised contempt. Instead, he's cleaning toilets, which is exactly where he belongs. Henry remained silent, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. But Audrey, who had been sleeping in one of the lobby chairs, covered by Henry's jacket, woke at the sound of raised voices. She stumbled over to her father, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? What's happening? Why is everyone yelling? Flynn sneered. This is exactly the problem. You're so busy playing house with this man and his brat that you've forgotten what's at stake. Our wedding is in 6 weeks. Merging your company with my firm's investment portfolio will create a powerhouse. But if word gets out that you're involved with him, we lose everything. Investors will pull out. Your board will question your judgment. It's over. Then let it be over, Ingrid said coldly. I don't love you, Flynn. I never did. This engagement was my father's idea, not mine, and I'm done letting him dictate my life. George's face purpled. You, ungrateful. No. Ingrid's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. Let's talk about how you've sacrificed every meaningful relationship I could have had because they weren't profitable enough. Let's talk about how you made me believe that love was a weakness and power was the only thing that mattered. And let's talk about how you stood by and watched an innocent man's life fall apart because saving money was more important than doing the right thing. She turned to Flynn. The engagement is off. You'll receive formal notice from my lawyers tomorrow. Flynn's expression twisted with rage. You'll regret this. I have evidence of financial irregularities in your acquisitions. I'll bury you. Try, Ingrid said. But do it from a distance. You're no longer welcome in my building. Security escorted Flynn out, his threats echoing through the marble halls. George lingered, his eyes hard as flint. You're making a mistake, Ingrid. That man is a ghost, a failure. He'll drag you down with him. Maybe, Ingrid said quietly. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Can you say the same? George Whitmore turned and walked out without another word. In the silence that followed, Ingrid sank onto the piano bench beside Henry. Audrey climbed into her father's lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. The child looked at Ingrid with solemn brown eyes. Ingrid managed a watery smile. A little. But sometimes being sad means you're brave enough to choose what's right instead of what's easy. Daddy's brave too, Audrey said. He plays music, even though his hand hurts sometimes. Ingrid looked at Henry. Really looked at him, saw not the janitor or the ghost of a broken dream, but the man who had loved her quietly for 16 years, who had written her a song so beautiful it had carried her through her darkest nights, even when he got no credit for it, who had sacrificed his own dreams to give a dead boy's memory meaning. Play it again, she whispered. Henry hesitated, then shifted Audrey so she sat beside him on the bench. Together, father and daughter, they played. Audrey's small fingers stumbled over the simple parts Henry taught her, and his scarred hand moved with the hard-won grace of someone who refused to let pain steal his last connection to beauty. The melody rose through the empty lobby, no longer a ghost of the past, but a bridge to something new. When the last note faded, Ingrid reached out and took Henry's damaged hand in both of hers. I need to know, she said. If I asked you to give me a chance to let me know you, really know you, would you be brave enough to say yes? Even though I come with all this baggage, even though my father will fight us every step of the way, even though the world will call you a gold digger and me a fool, Henry's eyes shone. I wrote you a love song 16 years ago. I think I can manage a little courage now. Ingrid laughed, the sound breaking through tears. Good, because I'm terrified, and I could use someone who knows what it's like to start over. The weeks that followed were not easy. Flynn made good on his threats, leaking carefully edited financial documents to the press that painted Ingrid as reckless and unfit to lead. But Corbin Hale came forward with documentation proving that Henry had indeed been the true composer of Starlit Promise, and the story shifted. Instead of a scandalous affair, it became a tale of long-lost love and artistic integrity. Donors and investors who had initially wavered rallied behind Ingrid, moved by the romance of it all. George Whitmore fought bitterly to regain control of the company, but the board sided with Ingrid. They forced him into early retirement with a severance package and a non-compete clause that effectively ended his influence. He moved to Florida, bitter and isolated, and Ingrid grieved the father she'd wanted him to be rather than the one he'd been. Henry returned to music slowly, carefully. Ingrid funded the creation of a scholarship program in Leon Merritt's name and Henry Calder's for young musicians from low-income backgrounds. Henry began teaching piano to children at a community center, and twice a week, Audrey attended his classes, her laughter ringing through rooms that had known too much silence. 1 year after that Christmas Eve, Whitmore Holdings hosted its annual holiday charity concert. The ballroom was packed, every seat filled, the air electric with anticipation. When Henry walked onto the stage, dressed not in work clothes but in a simple black suit, his daughter's hand in his, the audience erupted in applause. He sat at the grand piano, and Audrey took her place on a small bench beside him. Ingrid stood in the wings, her heart in her throat. She wore red again, but this time the dress felt like a celebration rather than armor. Henry's fingers found the keys, and Starlit Promise filled the hall. But this time, the ending was different. He'd written a new coda, a series of cascading phrases that spoke not of loss, but of hope, of second chances, of love that waits patiently in the shadows until it's finally called into the light. When the music ended and the applause washed over them, Henry stood and found Ingrid in the crowd. She made her way to the stage, and when she reached him, he took her hand. "The melody you wrote saved me twice," she said, her voice barely audible over the cheering audience. "The first time, it gave me a reason to keep going after Leon died. The second time, it led me to you." Henry smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Then I'd say it was worth every note." Audrey tugged on Ingrid's hand. "Can we get hot chocolate now? The kind with marshmallows?" Ingrid laughed and scooped the child up. As they walked off the stage together, Henry, Ingrid, and Audrey, the melody still seemed to linger in the air. A promise kept, a circle completed. Behind them, Corbin Hale watched from the audience, his eyes bright with tears, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfect execution, but from broken people brave enough to play anyway. Months later, on a spring afternoon when cherry blossoms drifted like snow through the city park, Henry and Ingrid sat on a bench while Audrey chased butterflies through the grass. The sunlight turned Ingrid's hair to gold, and Henry thought, not for the first time, that he was the luckiest man alive. "I've been thinking," Ingrid said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "about the song. Starlit Promise. It had an ending before, but it feels different now, like it's still being written." Henry laced his fingers through hers. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best promises aren't the ones we make once and lock away. Maybe they're the ones we keep remaking, every day, in 1,000 small ways." Ingrid turned to look at him, her blue eyes soft. "Then, make me a promise. Not forever, not some grand declaration. Just promise me today that you'll keep playing, that you'll keep teaching Audrey, that you'll keep showing me what it means to love something even when it's hard." "I promise," Henry said, and he meant it. Audrey ran back to them then, breathless and grinning, a cherry blossom petal caught in her dark curls. "Daddy, Miss Ingrid, come see. There's a piano player over there by the fountain. And he's really good, but not as good as you." Henry laughed and stood, pulling Ingrid to her feet. "Should we go listen?" "Absolutely," Ingrid said. But first, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sure, tasting of coffee and promise. When they broke apart, Henry's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What was that for? For writing me a song when you didn't have to. For being brave enough to show up even when you were scared. For teaching me that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones everyone else overlooks." She squeezed his hand. "For being you." They walked toward the fountain, Audrey skipping ahead, and Henry thought about how 16 years ago he'd been a scared kid who poured his heart into 8 bars of music, never imagining where those notes would lead to a life he'd never dared to dream was possible. The pianist by the fountain was young, maybe 19, playing with more enthusiasm than polish. But there was something pure in his effort, something that reminded Henry of who he used to be. When the boy finished his song and looked up nervously, expecting criticism, Henry clapped. "That was beautiful," he said. "Keep playing, even when it's hard. Even when people tell you you're not good enough. Keep playing." The young pianist's face lit up, and he nodded vigorously before launching into another song. Ingrid slipped her arm around Henry's waist as they listened. Audrey climbed onto her lap, and the three of them sat there as the music washed over them, imperfect, heartfelt, and achingly human. Above them, cherry blossoms fell like grace, and somewhere in the distance, someone was laughing, and the world felt, for this one shining moment, exactly as it should be. That night, after Audrey had been tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed bear and a goodnight song, Henry returned to the piano in Ingrid's apartment. She'd bought it for him 3 months ago, and every time he saw it, his throat tightened with emotion. She sat beside him on the bench, her head resting on his shoulder. "Play me something new," she said. "Something that's just ours." Henry's fingers hovered over the keys, and then he began. The melody was simple at first, just a conversation between two notes, tentative and searching. But gradually it grew, became a dialogue, became a dance. There were moments of dissonance that resolved into harmony, phrases that stumbled before finding their rhythm, silences that spoke louder than sound. When he finished, Ingrid was crying. "What's it called?" Henry thought for a moment. "Second movement," he said. "Because every great piece of music has more than one part. And this? Us? This is just the beginning." Ingrid kissed him then, deep and slow, and when they finally pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, "Promise me we'll keep writing this song together, that no matter what happens, we won't let the music stop." "I promise," Henry said. And this time, there were no secrets, no shadows, no ghosts of the past standing between them. Just two people who had found each other across years and loss and impossible odds, who had chosen each other not because it was easy, but because some songs are too important not to sing. Outside, the city hummed its evening symphony car horns and distant sirens and the soft rush of wind through trees. But inside that apartment, in the golden glow of lamplight, there was only music, the kind that heals, the kind that saves, the kind that proves that even the most broken things can be made beautiful again if someone brave enough is willing to try.